Mr. Ric Ptak, how are you?
I'm great, Dom. How are you doing?
I'm good. So nice to be on the line with you again.
Yeah, I'm look forward to today's discussion. So I'm raring to go. I'm full of energy and pumped, and as always. So yeah, let's see where we go with this.
You've taken some time off your marathon training schedule to sit down for a minute and talk to us about shop efficiencies.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, shop efficiencies and how to make improvements and where to maybe pinpoint some of the barriers and what keeps you up at night. Those kinds of things, right? So.
I have to say, though, before we start, for the people who are listening to this as an audio, I think you've got to watch the YouTube video. Ric is he's putting on a beard clinic right now. That's the sign of a skilled woodworker, isn't a beard a sign of?
Well, I think it adds a lot of credence to experience, right? So you see somebody with a long, bushy white beard, and you say, "Well, that guy must have some experience." So
He must know what he's talking about when it comes to
we hope, right? So
actually, hey, great segue. Ric, who are you? And why the heck would you be talking to the worldwide community of cabinet makers and architectural millworkers, furniture makers, etc.?
well, that's a great question. So I am a cabinet maker by trade. And so I've got the experience where I've been on the floor, obviously a journeyman, a cabinet maker, and then moved my way up into being a foreman for a number of different shops. And then was a plant manager where I had about 75 people on the floor that, where we made some pretty high-end retail store fixtures and millwork. And I was also, or I still am, involved in a woodworking association. And so obviously, overseeing that millwork gets built properly, working to standards, having a procedure and things like that. So yeah, I mean, my background is a trusted advisor to industries in woodworking and just helping them identify and implement productivity improvements.
Yeah.
So I've got some lean expertise, and I like to bring that to companies in a practical way. So help them implement with their workers on the floor, making improvements. Bring my critical eye, help spot waste, and identify opportunities to improve. And the big thing for me is always strive to do more with less. So it doesn't mean buy more equipment, build a new shop. It's work with what you have and make those improvements.
I often say that it's not what you've got, it's what you do with what you've got.
Exactly. Just raise the bar. You're doing things a certain way now. Let's raise the bar and do them better. Let's make sure that we keep the voice of the customer in mind. Let's make sure that we give the customer what they're asking for. Obviously, let's make sure we're communicating with the customer and, with our employees. I always look at taking measurements, right? And making sure that we know what the health of our customer is. Let's make sure we know what the health of the business is, obviously, because if your business isn't healthy, you're not going to go very far. And then we also want to measure the health of our employees. And that means the culture. What is the culture? Am I building the culture properly so that my employees stay loyal? That, am I training them? Am I making sure that I'm leading them and mentoring them and coaching them? So that's some of the things that I bring to the table and help companies with that journey so that they get better at doing those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, today we're going to be talking about the open question that I get a lot on this show, and Ric, as a professional in the industry, you've probably got this a lot, is, hey, we're losing money in the shop. That's the basis of our conversation today, and you being an expert on continuous improvement, we're going to dig into that. But isn't it so funny that culture and communications, two soft, fuzzy, I mean, they couldn't be more Care Bear, leprechaun type words if we chose them. But at the end of the day, if you're not communicating with your team, or if your team's not communicating back to you effectively, respectfully, and if we don't have the right culture, every day is like pushing a lead ball uphill.
Yeah, we can't read minds, and it's better to not assume and ask questions and find out where things are at and what's going on, and then that way we have an idea and we know what the expectations are. It may not be what we want to hear, but at least we know. And
That's
then
the,
we can do something about the things we don't like or aren't going in the right direction, right? So communication is key in my mind, and it has to be between all the departments within a facility so that they understand what's going on, and daily communications. I mean,
yeah.
I've installed a lot of huddle boards for companies where they didn't have that communication. And once they start meeting every day, only 5 minutes a day, they talk about the right things, safety, production, quality, and keeping costs down. And none of those are exclusively number one, two, or three. They're all important. But if you focus on those four things, those four pillars, I like to call them, and talk about, what do we need to accomplish today? What's a roadblock? Where can we dismantle roadblocks? And then talk about that and work together and create procedures and document procedures where they become the standards. Then everybody knows what the expectations are, and it becomes easier in those aspects than to deal with things, so that when you do have a difficult customer or a machine breaks down or something, you're not as stressed, and you can deal with that in a much more effective manner.
Well, because the communications are clear, especially with that huddle board. I have to laugh at the huddle board, Ric.
Well, why?
Well, because that's how you and I run across each other. I'll start working with a new account and I'll say, hey, send me a picture of your board if you have one. And I'll see the picture and I'm like, are you guys working with Ric Ptak? And they're like, and then I think other times you're in an account after I've been there. It's probably the same thing. But what's interesting is consistently I find most often people aren't using a central, call it a whiteboard, it can take any form, but a central whiteboard to communicate. Mm-hmm. And then if they are, they might not be having it laid out correctly to line up with the way they want to get things done. And it comes back to we're losing money in the shop, which is our big conversation here. You've got to communicate so you know where the leaks are.
Yeah, you have to communicate. And I've visited lots of firms that say, well, we meet once a week. We have a production schedule once a week. And how long? And I say, how long does that meeting take you? Oh, it's an hour and a half, 2 hours. I said, okay, so if there was a problem on Monday and you meet Thursday afternoon, the problem on Monday is not on everybody's top of mind.
Right.
Today's problem, like if it's Thursday, we meet Thursday after lunch. Thursday morning's problem is going to be what I'm going to talk about at the meeting. So if you meet every day but shorter amounts of time, I can only focus then, or I should only be focusing on what happened in the last 24 hours. What do I have to do in the next 24 hours? Focus on those things so that you can move your project forward, right? And get it to the point where you can invoice it, because let's face it, if you want to make money, you need to move the lead time has to be short, right? The time you get the project, I need to get need to get the drawings done, approved. I need to get the materials in. I need to get it built, out of the shop, installed, delivered, whatever, so I can bill it, and then I can move on to the next one.
Yeah, it's something that I hear from people quite often as well. It's like, and I'll hear it as a statement like this, or a hidden statement. Don, you don't want me to have more meetings, do you? To which I answer, no, I want you to have more, shorter, better meetings.
Well, better meetings with an agenda, and they're quick, and you get to the point. There has to be an objective behind it, and the daily 5-minute meetings have an agenda, and you go through them and you talk about the issues that you may be having. Or if you don't have any issues, you talk about the small improvements you want to make so that you make your jobs easier, for the future.
Yeah. I should point out to all of our listeners right now that Ric has been on the show before on an episode called Let's Talk About the Foreman. So if you're liking what Ric's talking about and you want to hear even more about on-site efficiencies and Foreman running the shop, go back and look at that episode. The number escapes me right now, but if you go back and look at all of the Cabinet Maker Profit Systems episode, you'll see Ric's name there. And the title is Let's Talk About the Foreman. So let's go to this. I'll pose the question to you, Ric. I'll pose the question that you and I both hear and that a lot of people have frustrations about. This topic came up because you and I were having a side conversation about a new program we're going to be running. And we said, what are the problems people are telling us about, right? Because before we come up with a problem that needs fixing, we got to make sure it's a real problem. And one of the things that I heard, and that sounds like you've heard a lot as well, is, hey, Ric, we're losing money in the shop. Do you ever hear that?
I hear it a number of times, just like you do. And, when somebody says that to me, I really stop and think for a moment, because obviously it comes from a place where they have a real belief that that's happening. You just don't make that nonchalantly, that kind of a statement.
Yeah.
I think about it in terms of, okay, the next thing I'm going to say is, I'm not going to give an answer because I don't know what the answer is, but I would ask that person, it's usually the owner that's making it, what specific facts cause you to say that you're losing money in the shop? Is it because there's rework, because there's inefficiencies, there's their wastes, are there fit and finish issues? And we can talk about, some of those things. And so the next question that I would want to ask is, how do you define the shop? So is the shop the whole firm? Is it the shop only the manufacturing floor? Is the shop the front end, the sort of the sales and the estimating? Is it the project management side and the drafting and the shop drawing and the engineering and the cutting lists and the programs? Or is it the installations maybe? So we need to really capture what the facts are when somebody makes that statement. So, because I'm interested in what are the facts.
Right. And can I just ask, is your office near a fire hall?
Yeah, there's a fire. There happens to be a fire siren going off right now. So unfortunately, I was hoping that wouldn't happen while we were doing the podcast, but there it is.
It's okay. We might as well. I'm sure it's entered people's minds here. But what I liked from what you said there is, when somebody comes to you with the question that, hey, look, we're losing money in the shop, you don't just have a knee-jerk reaction. It leads itself to other questions.
A lot of questions come then, so we have to determine, where is the money being lost and why, like, what and how type questions are going to get to that, right? What causes you to say that? How are you defining that? Those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously there's something behind that, so we need to capture what it is. We need to get to the root cause of it.
Yeah. I'm impressed when I get that kind of question from a business owner, because it means that they've taken a moment to finally lift up their head and look around.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, operations are running. We know how to get business. We know how to produce work. We know how to bill and invoice for work. But if I was to change something, I think we need some shop efficiency. And so the question, as you already outlined, has a bunch of, it's like a porcupine. There's a bunch of quills sticking out of that. We've got to figure out which one is where the problem is.
Mm-hmm.
But at least the business owner in that case is asking the question, and they're not just thinking the money's all in the sawdust, because now it comes down to making sure your systems, your processes are running smooth, no drama, should be actually look boring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
should. I mean, really, we need to determine, are there some measurements being taken? If somebody tells me I'm losing money in the shop, and I can tell you that, sales were this, and this is what I allowed for, and my profit margin is this, but I only made this, and I believe we're not hitting the mark over here or over there, then there's a bit more credence to it. There's a bit more facts behind it. So that's what we're trying to get to. If you're not taking measurements, well, if you aim for nothing, you'll hit it every time, right, Dom? So, I mean, we need to know what some of the measurements are. I mean, and then if we are taking measurements, well, what gets measured gets attention, and what gets attention is going to improve. So, you can put your focus on it then, so we need to determine why is the shop losing money, in what department, in what area. Is it a piece of equipment? Is it a bottleneck? Is it, maybe the estimating isn't sound? We need to peel back the onion skin layers and really determine why.
Yeah,
where.
It's very important to define that question properly, because I think we can even go above estimating and say maybe we're estimating correctly, but we're estimating to the wrong kind of clients.
Yes, could be.
They're grinding us, pushing us against a wall, and the way we run operations, we are. I won't say we can't make money, but it's very difficult to make money in that environment. And mm-hmm. I think the challenge here is, as with most of us, we work in our office alone. There's people coming at us every 5 minutes with questions. We don't have a chance to think, much less sit down in a room with a guy like you, me, and the owner, and just talk about it around the table where you can have a moment to think like a business owner and just consider the possibilities like you just did in your very opening question. When you say you're losing money in the shop, what does the shop mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Into this big, huge question that you can start drilling down into.
Exactly. I mean, it would be better, the statement might be better to say, I'm losing money in the front end, or I'm losing money in my installations, or I'm losing money when I do residential jobs, because mostly I do commercial jobs. And then I took this residential job because, I was a little slow schedule wise, and it looked like a good project to get into. But by the time I managed the customers' expectations, it cost me an arm and a leg. So I lost money on that type of a job. So then it's good to understand, well, then don't take on that kind of work. Or if you do, expect that you will run into problems. I mean, it could be you need to fill your schedule up with that type of a job to keep your guys busy. I understand that. You make a conscious decision doing that, knowing that you're probably not going to make very much money on that job. But I need the guys for 6 weeks from now because I got this big job that I need them here, and you can't lay them off. So sometimes we understand that you have to make certain decisions as a business owner that maybe aren't in the best interest of your business for the short term. So long as you don't do that multiple times and you're losing money on every job, then you're not going to last very long, are you?
Yeah. So what I've taken from you now, what I've learned from you now is when somebody opens with the question, we're losing money in the shop, is that, and anybody who's listening, if that's if that question resonates with you, if you're feeling it, if maybe you're getting a little hot under the collar, then Ric's first question is, where do you feel you're losing money? And then wherever that is, have you measured it? Mm-hmm. Right? It's easy to measure, I'm not taking home money, so there's no profits. It's easy to measure that conversation across the kitchen table with your spouse when you say, well, I'm working 80 hours a week, and no, I didn't bring home a wage, this week. That's a measurement of profitability there. So if profitability is an issue, then you have to dig back to the root cause, to use a language that Ric and I would be comfortable with. What's the root cause analysis? It's not the fact that you're not taking home the profit. It's why we're not taking profit on the jobs we're doing, even though we're busy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's say that it was profitability. I feel that I'm not taking home enough profits. Mm-hmm. Give us a couple things from your experience that somebody could measure pretty quickly or easily to help them understand what their profitability is looking like.
Well, I'm going to answer that by focusing on a couple of examples of where I've helped companies to become more productive, because I think it's an easy analogy to understand that if you can produce more in a shorter amount of time, and it's to the quality that your customer expects, you will become more profitable, obviously, right? So you have to understand where your costs are, first of all, and I'll give you an example of a company that I dealt with, Company X, that necessarily didn't know where their costs were. I went in to do an assessment with that particular company, and the son was running it. The dad was sort of semi-retired, but he always would check in on things, so he kept a pretty tight rein on things. But he wasn't there all the time. And then there was a controller as well. And so all three of these individuals all had different ideas of where their costs were. Mm-hmm. How much are we paying the guys? How much the material that we buy, that we bring in, how much does that cost? How much does our equipment maintenance cost us? And then how much we're selling our products for. All three of them weren't on the same page. So it was very difficult to come up with a real accurate assessment. So, where I asked some specific questions about benchmarking, what are your sales? How much, how much square footage do you have? And how many people do you have? What are your yearly sales? Those types of things. And so, I took some information from one individual. When I presented that at the end of the week in my summary report to the other two, then they disagreed with it. And, I said, okay, I can only go by what you told me. So I got some figures in from one person, but if we don't know, the true cost of things, then maybe you need to sit together and really hammer that out. So that's from a high level. Then when we get down on the shop floor and start looking at the operation of things and the flow of production, and it doesn't really matter what you make, if you're making commercial millwork, kitchen cabinets, trusses, your hardwood flooring, it doesn't matter. You're manufacturing something. So you start with raw goods, you do some processes to it. You might add some trinkets to it. You put some finish on it, and then you're sending it out to the customer in sort of the state that they want it to be in. But it's just looking at the flow of the product through the shop. How much time does it take to go from the one work cell to the next cell? How long is it sitting in between the work cells? How are the people interacting with it? So that's where we start identifying wastes, and there's 9 wastes that I look at, things like, are we overproducing things? Are we producing things that aren't needed by the customer? Are we waiting for processes or equipment or an upstream of an activity? Is there unnecessary transport going on of goods? Is there inappropriate processing of materials? Is there a lot of inventory of product and work in progress? Because if there's too much inventory on the floor, it's choking up areas so it becomes really inefficient to move product and goods and the equipment and so on. So unnecessary movement of people, too much walking. I always say if you're working on a process, you should be 3 steps or less that you're taking to do what you need to do, right? Huh. So if you're walking, great distances over a period of time, then that's obviously inefficient. Defects, rework, I think we all understand that that's costing companies a lot of money, or it can, right? If something is done incorrectly and I have to redo it. And it costs a lot less if you catch it in the shop before you ship it to your customer. But imagine if you send it out and you didn't even catch it, and then the customer is telling you that's not acceptable. You've got to redo these doors. I don't like the lacquer finish on these doors.
And that's a huge problem.
That costs you a lot of money.
Yeah.
Because you've installed it. Now you've got to get somebody to go back and bring them back to the shop. You've got to make new ones or sand them down, whatever the case may be. And it's just going to cost you lots of money.
Yeah.
Underutilization of people, and of course there's safety complications. So there's a lot of waste that you can really start to identify when I analyze a shop. And once we take away a lot of some of this waiting time and some of this excessive walking, we all of a sudden can improve the efficiencies in the shop, where I put some systems in place, or help the company put some systems in place, standards. And so everybody understands what the expectations are. That speaks back to the communication factor again. I'm going to communicate and make sure that everybody's trained on those procedures, and then things go a lot smoother, right? So that's really where you have to kind of look at things. The other big one for me is fit and finish issues. Product gets processed in different areas. So we've got beam saws and CNC routers that are processing the panels, but we've got to marry that up with hardware. Sometimes we've got to marry that up with dovetail drawers. We've got to marry that up with the finishes have to be there, and all these other products, plastic laminates. That all has to kind of hit the right areas at the right time. Otherwise, you end up waiting for things. And sometimes what happens is, if you wait too long, or you say, look, I'm not going to wait for that, let's send it on to the next process, and when it comes in, we'll have to back it up and do it. So those are very costly, those types of things. And sometimes you can't help it. Don't get me wrong. You can't eliminate it, but you can reduce the amount of times that happens if you start communicating better and start putting systems in place to prevent that. Really, fit and finish speaks to, I better have what I need when I need it to do this process step. I complete it, I move it on, and it doesn't have to come back, or I don't have to wait for something.
And Rick, what that comes back to for this conversation, looping back to what we talked about in the beginning, is communicating. Mm-hmm. If you're only having that conversation once a week, as you suggested, you've heard in shops, we've all heard that. Mm-hmm. And the painter says, I don't have the samples, or I don't have the paint. And then you go call the supplier and they're like, yeah, we don't have the paint either. that's when your project manager and the owners start pulling out what's left of their hair. And
Yeah.
those are communication loops. Those are communication we should be having in those 5-minute meetings at the very least 3 times a week. Very least. Just a quick, factual huddle to talk about making decisions and understanding. Hey, listen, this is going to hit finishing today. Do you have what you need? It's going to hit finishing tomorrow. Do you have what you need? And that's when we should find out if there's problems that haven't been attended to in the beginning.
Yes, and the added advantage to communicating on a daily basis, and you're seeing that the same problems crop up over and over again. Somebody's going to say, look, why don't we put a proper system in place so we can prevent some of these things from happening in the future? I don't want to have to deal with this thing next week and 3 months from now and 6 months from now, because guess what? Every job, just about every job has a finish of some sort, or if it doesn't, they have hardware, and if you have hardware issues. So how many times a year is that happening? And how many times a year does it happen? And what is the cost to your company when when those things go wrong? Obviously you fix it and you put a lot of energy behind rework and then playing catch up. We expend a lot of extra energy for that, but that costs money. And that money, that's not money that you can charge your customer for. I don't think a customer is going to accept on the invoice, we're not very efficient, so we had to do things 3 or 4 times. So here's a line item, just, we're going to charge you another, 5% of your job just so that we can capture those lost inefficiencies.
Yeah.
What's the customer going to tell you? To go pound sand, right? Obviously. So you can't pass that off. So that's where the owner, the management says, I'm losing money in the shop. That could be one of the things, because you're efficient and you're doing a lot of rework, or you're doing things over again, or the fit and finish isn't there. So now things are looping back. The flow isn't only one way.
I would add
the problems are.
I would add to that, if you've got a quality control issue, as you mentioned, in this case, fit and finish, and we're getting punch lists or deficiency lists from the, let's just say the site super, which is the GC, that spills over into the next job. And that's when we start to realize that price isn't the only deciding factor in winning a job. Because if they say, look, we gave that last job to Rick and his crew, and they had a huge deficiency list, the quality wasn't there, even though his price is on, maybe we're going to try another company. So the soft impact of those things is really the business impact of that, because you're not getting the juicy, profitable jobs because they're overlooking you because you've had problems with X.
Yeah, I mean, you're only as good as your last gig. So if you had a difficult job with a GC and the GC has a bad taste in their mouth, they're probably not going to give you the next job, even if you've got the lowest price. It just because I had so much problems with that company. I'm still, my hair's gray. It hasn't quite come back to the original color. So you know what I mean? Like, and the clients too. I mean, if it's a residential or private customer, they're not going to recommend you to their friends because they just didn't get the satisfaction level. They weren't satisfied. They didn't feel they got the value from you. So you're always wanting to give your customers the best value, the highest quality.
Right.
And sometimes that means, going out on the extra limb and maybe losing money on this job. But I know there's some other jobs that I can get from that particular general contractor or from word of mouth. So you learn from it and you make improvements. So you always need to be improving and changing and raising the bar. Right?
That is the key, right? Is if we're finding the same problems coming up in our company again and again, but we don't do anything about it, that's not okay. That's not your job as an owner. Your job is to find problems and fix them.
Yeah.
Son asked me, this was a couple of weeks ago. He's like, Dad, what's a company? Because now that he's home and he hears me in my now home office, it's like, Dad, what's a business? What's a company? And would you believe it, Rick? It stumped me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how to answer. Right? He's 11. It's a good question.
Yeah.
And I just said, finally, I came up with what I thought was a good answer. A business is a collection of systems that works efficiently and makes the owner a profit.
Mm-hmm.
And he's 11. He's like, yeah, whatever. It didn't matter what you said. He just
It worked.
me for a loop, right? So as my job as the owner is I need to be finding problems and finding ways to solve them. And it comes back to the opening question here is, what do I need to measure? And that's when you came back and said, measure things like measure your cost of goods, measure how much you're spending on people. One thing actually on the measurement side and people that I quite often see missing is people don't view their shop as a man. And I say man, gender neutral, but how much does it cost to flick on the lights on a Saturday?
Yeah.
How much does it cost to flick on the lights on a Monday? The shop has its own costs, and there's an hourly rate for your shop, which is not necessarily what you're charging your clients. If you're charging, I'll just choose a silly number, $100 an hour for shop work, that doesn't mean that's the overhead costs of your shop. You need to go back and calculate those things and know what that actual number is. And quite often is, let's say your shop rate's $100 an hour, and you find that on a 10-hour job, you're losing $1,000. Guess where you should be looking? Are we charging for our shop as a man?
Yeah. Are we charging enough, and then going after different jobs where you can charge more. So really that's where you're getting to, I think, right? I think we're on the same page here because, there are lots of customers or potential clients out there. And some of them, they're only looking for the lowest cost, and there's only a certain quality level that they're really interested in. So if that's your business model, if you fit that, great, and go after those types of jobs and do lots of high volume. But I think a lot of woodworkers pride themselves on doing, a high quality product. And so they want to find the customers that appreciate that. And so I want to give my customer that because, we're on the same page when it comes to that, right?
Yeah. Well, Ric, we should probably remind everybody where this conversation started, because you and I were having a virtual coffee and we realized we get the same questions from people all the time about losing money and the shop's not efficient enough. And so you and I came up with something called a SWIFT assessment. Do you think we could transition the call now to talking about this new SWIFT assessment program that you and I have created?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, it's a really high level, quick snapshot of your company, especially if you feel like you could do with some, inefficiency identification or opportunity identification, whatever you want to call it. So, it's really just identifying, what is it that you make, who's your customer, what are kind of your yearly sales, and just give me a snapshot of what the process steps are. And then, we really would like to see a video of the flow of how your product goes through the shop floor. And based off of, some of those questions that we've asked, and then watching the video, potentially maybe we can spot some things that, you as an owner or manager don't see, because, if you're in it every day, you've got your blinders on, you're just focused on production, focused on the schedule. I got to get this out today. I got to get that out tomorrow. The material isn't here. I got to chase the supplier and make sure. Then you don't see the areas of opportunity for improvement, right? You don't see necessarily the wastes that are happening.
Perspective
that I talked about, right? So
so
it's just a quick snapshot, and then we would just come up with a set of maybe some recommendations, and then see where it goes from there. You can have a look at those things yourself. You can ask other consultants or other experts in the field to come and analyze it. You can ask us to come. It just can take off from there, right?
So let me paint this as a picture for everybody, because what Ric's talking about here and what we created is something called a SWIFT assessment. So it's if you have the question in your mind, hey, we're losing money in the shop, we think it could be running better. There's an us versus them mentality in our company where the shop thinks the office is out to lunch and the office thinks the shop is out to lunch. This is Ric's background. It's continuous improvement. He's a continuous improvement expert. And so what we're going to do is we need to get our systems working properly here at Cabinet Maker Profit System. So we're going to run a beta program for people to take advantage of. And Ric and I have decided we're going to do this with 5 companies first, just to get our systems and processes flowing. So what people can do is, if you're interested in taking part of the beta, and because you want your shop efficiency to, if you want your shop to run more efficiently, you're going to take part in this beta program. If you're interested, you need to text me the word SWIFT. And so my cell number is 604-837-8361. Just send me the word SWIFT, and Ric and I will take care of all the details from there. But We're going to choose 5 of the applicants. You're going to get an application form. We're only going to choose 5 applicants, the first 5. But what we're looking for here is that you've got the right size shop and that you can technically do this within 45 days. So Ric, what's an ideal shop for this? What's the minimum size shop, I would say, for?
Well, I would say like for people and up, it would fit quite nicely, you know, and because there's enough
Movement,
functional things happening with 4 people that you have to keep them busy in certain different areas. So I would say that 4 people and up would be the ideal size.
Perfect. Yeah, and then the technical questions we're going to ask, they're not out of this world. We just want to make sure you've got a camera so you can do conference calls with video. We want to make sure that you know how to use your own technology so you can take videos of your shop. There's a questionnaire we're going to ask you to fill out. And also, this has to move as a process as well. You have to be able to do this in 45 days. So if for some reason in your life you're not able to do that in the next 45 days, then you just wouldn't qualify. But Ric and I want to try this out for the first 5 companies that you know can meet the criteria and able to do this on time. The cost is going to be $750 US to do this, but only for the first 5 customers. So if you're listening to this far in the future and you send me this text in the year 2025, I'd have to say in my cheesiest voice, this is a time-limited offer. Oh, well, we can't do it forever, right? I'm sure we'll reassess this after we do the first 5, but
right.
Yeah. So let me run through the process one more time, Ric, and tell me if I've got this right. So somebody who's interested is going to text me.
Mm-hmm.
Send me the word SWIFT to 604-837-8361. Then we're going to send them an application. They have to fill out the application, and what we're looking for there is to make sure you have the technology and company size to do this. Then Ric is going to send the instructions to them. Part of that instructions is you need to take a video of your shop. I like your suggestion. You want them to take a video in reverse. What does that mean?
Well, in reverse, it just forces you to think maybe a little bit more carefully about how your product flows through and what gets done last, what gets done second last, what gets done, you know, in the reverse order, so that we make sure we capture all the work cells and everything that goes into building your product.
Right.
So that's why I say it's important to do it in reverse, because you know and I'm thinking a little bit ahead on my lean training, but it's always has to be like a pull instead of a push. What I mean by that is the old traditional way, and I, you know, when I was a CAD maker on the bench, that was what we did. We pushed stuff. So if the boss brought me, or the foreman brought me a bunch of things that I had to process on my bench, you know, and I'll take an example. You know, we built 500 window frames for a big. It was a college at the time, right? So, and they were old style. It was a historical building, so it had to be wooden window frames. So we had 500 to do. So it was just, you know, every day I had to do 5 or 6 or 8 of them. And so I would do them and push it on to the next process step, even though the next process step couldn't take it, right? Because they were backlogged and there was a bottlenecks going on. And so what we're trying to do now when we look at flow and improving efficiencies, there has to be a pull system. So if I'm ready for the next process, if I'm ready to do the next thing on my upstream, then I'm pulling from that upstream. So there's only 1 or 2 in queue, and I'm pulling it, and I'm doing it, and then it sits there, and the next process step is pulling from me. So it's really to do with pull. It's like incorporating that pull, and then that really forces you to think more efficiently, because now you have to really balance the workflow and understand, you know, that you don't have too much work in progress between and so on. So that's where that comes from.
Only a woodworker with a bushy white beard would speak that kind of wisdom. I love it. So we need that video, and then there's a production questionnaire that Ric's going to send you. You'll need to fill that in as much detail as you can, because the more detailed you are with us, the better a report of recommendations you'll get back is. And then after we've got our whole package, Ric goes into the cave of wisdom. Is that what I'm going to call it?
Yeah, you can call it that.
He's going to take all the data and the information and resort it into usable, functional material and information for you as the owner to take back. And then once Ric has got his work piece done, we're going to have a debrief call with you. Now, this is the important part for us, because we're doing the beta for 5 companies and it's introductory. We need to ask you that we can record that debrief call so that we can use it in the future for people who are going to ask us, what value is this? Does it even work? That's why we're only doing it for $750 US. I think people recognize, Rick, the old version of you fly into town, you stay there for 2 days, you do a full site tour, you ask everybody, costs mount pretty quickly. It's way.
That's right. That's right. That gets costly, and some companies want to do that. That's fine, but they're usually, they're in a position where they want to make some real big improvements, and they understand that there's going to be some value to those additional costs.
But we've got here outside economic conditions. We've got social distancing. We've got quarantining, but yet business can't stop. Construction is still busy regardless of what the media is saying. So this is us putting a modern twist on the old version of put Rick on an airplane and have him come visit you. And then you have to take him to the cool lunch place in your industrial complex and all that stuff. Anyway, so once Rick does the work, then we have the debrief. So that's the program in a nutshell. And again, I'll just say this one more time, Rick, and I'll get you to put some concluding thoughts. But send me a text as soon as you can to 604-837-8361. If you put the keyword SWIFT in there, then I'll take care of the details and I'll get you the application form as quickly as possible so that Rick and I can review them. And again, the most important thing to us here is that you're open and willing to have us record your debrief call so that other people in the future say, hey, this stuff is valuable. I get it. Look at the improvements. Look at the opportunities, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just give you a quick example, Dom, if you don't mind. I'll share a quick example where something like this might fit, and you could see where some of the value is in it. So I did some work with the company, and they did send me a picture, first of all, and I have got it in front of me here, a picture of the CNC operator who is doing some additional processing to a panel that has just come off the nested base router. So I said, okay, so why is that happening? I asked this because in my mind, if I put a sheet on a nested base router, the router should do everything that needs to happen to that sheet. I shouldn't have to do additional processing. So anyway, I saw that there was additional processing. So I asked, so what's happening here? So they said, well, they don't cut through on the parts that are being milled on that sheet because the vacuum doesn't hold properly some of the parts. So we're leaving little tabs.
Right.
So this guy is routering the tabs. So I said, okay, if you could improve the vacuum on that CNC router so that it would hold that down, would that be value to you? Well, I think so. So I determined, then asked them a couple of questions back and forth, and I said, so what are you making? And they said, well, we're making a lot of products. It's a certain little pod that they make, and they need 6 sheets. And so they do about 200 of these pods a year. And so I said, okay, so if you spend 5 minutes per sheet cutting these tabs and routering it flush, and there's 6 sheets per loop, that equals 30 minutes. 30 minutes times 200 of these units per year is 100 hours. So if we could reduce that by 50%, I'm still saving 50 hours. What would you do with an additional 50 hours, Dom?
Yeah.
Right. So, and that we can determine by just, I see a process happening. I ask a bunch of questions, get some measurements back or some information back, and I can say, look, if we can reduce that by 50%, that's going to be a big help to you. I'm not even saying eliminate all the routing totally. I'm just reducing it and you're just getting a cost saving.
So what I really liked about the example you gave there, Rick, is that the power is actually the power of the question, not the answer.
Yes. It's really about asking the right questions to get to the root and say, well, what if this happened? Would that help you? Oh yeah, of course it would. Okay, then let's find a way to break down those barriers to make that happen.
Hey, this is kind of a funny not funny real, but imagine a situation where an owner's been trying to talk to his production manager or the foreman about a change, but the foreman's resistant or the team is resistant. And then suddenly this Rick guy descends through the clouds and says, why are you remachining the tabs on a CNC cut? And it becomes a real thing, because quite often the resistance to these changes is not at the owner level. It's internal as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I do public speaking. That's one of the first things that you and I did together was a public speaking event. How many times I've been up speaking and I see the president or the CEO at the back of the room and they've got their arms folded and they're kind of looking over their glasses at me with kind of a pissed off face, right? And I'm thinking, I'm not going to make it past coffee break. And of course we take a coffee break, and what does Dom do? I walk straight up to the guy and I'm like, hey, how's things? And he's like, they always say the same thing. Like, Dom, I've been saying the same thing to this team for years. How come when you say it, they're clapping? When I say it, they ignore me. And so that's when I exhale. I'm like, okay, good. We're on the right track here. But how often is the owner just being ignored, even in their own shop, because communication, numbers, important, the way it's being brought up, all of those things, right?
Well, and let's face it. I mean, if the statement comes out that, we're losing money in the shop or the firm's losing money, then, we can't keep doing things the same way and expect different results. We've got to do something different. We've got to step outside our comfort zone a little bit and try something different and either prove that it works or prove that it doesn't work. Yeah. So, either way, you've got to try something different. Right?
Well, Ric, we have gone, this is probably one of the longest episodes we've ever done. It's juicy. Mm-hmm. I think that given this episode, I think I'm going to have you back again to talk more lean in the future.
Okay.
For those of you listening, you're okay with it so far?
I love talking lean with folks if they're interested and how they can apply it in a practical way, because we hate drive-by lean events, and this is the way I say that is because you'll get a consultant in typically and they'll do a bunch of training and leave some binders there and everybody's pumped, and then these binders end up on a shelf and 6 months later they're full of dust, because that's a drive-by lean event. And what I like to come in and help the actual people doing the work make improvements, but I don't tell them what to do. I ask questions and they tell me, well, if I did it this way, it'd be a lot better. I said, well, then let's do that. Geez, I think that's a great idea. So let's implement it and see if it makes a difference, right? So it's just it's creating that buy-in and getting the people who are doing the work to come up with the improvements, because they know best what causes them grief in their area.
It's I'm a big fan of Paul Akers, as I think many of us in the industry are, Fast Cap. And I was listening to his audiobook here over the last couple of months again. And it was interesting how even in his recognition of lean, it really is consistency applied over time. It's, would you call it a drive-by
lean event versus, actually making some improvements and getting buy-in with the folks who are doing the work and getting them to really take charge of it and giving them the ownership and the coaching and the mentoring, right?
Yeah, it's a lifestyle. It's not continuous improvement is a lifestyle. It's not an event. And I think that's where we're coming at this. So Ric, if people want to get in touch with us, I guess if they want to take part in this SWIFT assessment for the beta program, again, guys, I'll give you every gender neutral. When I say guys, I mean everybody. But if you're listening to this and you think you want to be in the beta program, get in touch with me by text as soon as you hear this, because those of you who are listening, who are subscribers to the podcast, obviously you've got a leg up on other people who aren't regularly listening. But send a text to 604-837-8361. And in that text, just say the word SWIFT. And then Ric and I will take care of getting you the application and everything else once we've made sure that you've got the technology and you can do this within 45 days, because it does have to move. As I've learned from Ric, we have to pull it through, not push it through. Ric, thanks so much for being with us today. It's been great.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Dom.
And I, it just occurred to me as we were talking earlier in the episode, if you guys like what Ric had to say, he did another episode on this podcast called Let's Talk About the Foreman. So certainly go back and subscribe to the podcast, but go back and listen to that episode and you'll hear Ric talk about his experience as a foreman and some of his inside knowledge on how a foreman can operate, or production manager can operate effectively inside the company as part of this whole continuous improvement culture that you're putting in place.
Right. Okay.
All right, Ric, great to have you on the show.
All right. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Thanks.